schools may transfer funds from certain campus-based programs into other campus-based programs. So for us, I said I get 146,000 in SEOG, but I get a little over 200,000 in federal work study. My administration chooses to transfer 25% of our work study funds into our SEOG program to use for grant programs. So just know you have some flexibility. Back to what they are, they're campus-based. You have some flexibility within the guidelines that the federal government has approved you to do. So you can have up to 25% SEOG in the work study, up to 25% of work study to Perkins or SEOG, to go the other way, up to 25% of Perkins to SEOG and work study, and up to 25% of SEOG to work study. Any work study funds transferred must be entered in the G5 as an expenditure against the work study authorization for the award year the funds were taken from. So again, you're back to working with the G5 system with your business office to make sure they also understand these regulations, right? There's also a specific, I want to, in years when you cannot transfer Perkins right now because there's no federal capital contribution anymore. So that's a little bit misleading on that slide, so I don't think you cannot do that. So don't get all excited because we know we've got, and I saw you, what, dollar signs, right?
I don't think you need to transfer.
Yeah, I knew she was. It's specific to the other two funds, and so in years when they're allocated to schools, we're allowed to transfer up to 25% of Perkins allocation for an award year to both SEOG. You need to be careful with this. You can't do that anymore because they're not contributing any more Perkins. You're only awarding what's coming in, and that's not a contribution, that's not an allocation. That makes sense? Carrie, she's not happy. I just deflated her.
Bubble.
Just deflated her. Carry forward and back, as I mentioned, you may transfer up to 10% of current year's allocation, forward or backwards, previous year in FSEOG and work study. So you can use SEOG and go backward and forward, up to 10%. So just be careful with all of that. You may carry back funds for summer employment. So if you needed to, you had already awarded all your funds, you could bring money back from the future allocation to allow students who are enrolled in summer school to work if you've already exhausted all of your work study. So there's some flexibility there when it comes to your work study funds to be able to help those. Also, 10% carry back of current year's SEOG allocation for use during your previous award year. Okay, so just, again, you need to refer back. If you're the person who's doing all of this, refer back. I just find it cleaner to award everything in 1 year if I possibly can. I do utilize my work study back and forth because that's a little more not set funds, but if I've got money in grant funds to award for SEOG, there's absolutely no reason in my mind to carry anything forward. Let's award those funds to all those students who are needy because I'm needing quadruple that really to help my students in that year. Make sense? Okay. The funds may not be transferred from SEOG to the Perkins. Otherwise, funds may be transferred both to and from Perkins and SEOG. Okay. So again, check those regulations in more detail. If you're going to start messing around with that, and I encourage them and financial aid officers and business officers to work very closely and make sure everybody's looking at those regs very, very carefully. Because again, you get into some sticky stuff if you're not careful. You may increase Perkins and SEOG and award at awards when the cost. Okay, let me start over. Blah. For study abroad. We mentioned that briefly when we talked a little bit about consortium and what we were going to do with that. The student is going to study abroad. You have some flexibility to increase a Perkins loan SEOG amounts on that student if it's going to exceed the cost of attending the home institution. So that's where you have an exception. Don't you love exceptions to the rules? But exception to those aggregate limits on Perkins loans can be increased if you see that cost is going to be greater if the student is going to study abroad. You can also increase SEOG as much as $400 to $4,400 maximum for that as well, okay? You may employ students through work-study program during a period of non-attendance preceding the study abroad in the U.S. at home institutions, branch campus, or wherever. So, that just makes sense. You're not going to, you're going to let them work with you if you know they're going to study abroad. They're still going to be in school. Student eligibility. For SEOG, the student has to be an undergrad without a baccalaureate degree or first professional degree. It does include less than half-time. I don't award students who are less than half-time SEOG funds myself, but for pretty obvious reasons. But know that you can't single out part-time students either and not award those. So you have to make a portion of your SEOG available to your part-time students, okay? So be careful with that. I know at our school, certainly you want to have all that going to my traditional students because my low-cost program is low cost. You want to use your grant funds for the higher cost. But you really need to have a specific portion of your SEOG funds going toward your part-time enrollment. So just be very careful. Again, it's exceptional financial need. I think we went over that, the lowest expected family contribution. And you must select students with the lowest EFCs who will also receive Pell Grant in that year, which stands to reason, right? Because Pell Grant is the most needy student. Students not Pell eligible due to the lifetime limit, not eligible for SEOG. So if they've hit their 600%, they cannot have SEOG, except in the situation that I told you about, that if they received Pell in the first semester, in the fall semester, and that hit their limit, they're okay to have SEOG for the year. But if they've already hit the 600%, they cannot have SEOG. Got it?
Say the first part again.
If they have hit their 600% in Pell eligibility prior to the beginning of that academic year, they cannot have SEOG. If they have 50% of their Pell eligibility left, and they get that all in fall, but they can have no more Pell in the spring, they still could have SEOG for the whole fall and spring academic year. Because they were within that academic year Pell eligible. Okay?
Yep.
Annual loan amounts are $100 to $4,000 and $4,400 for study abroad. Don't know what $400 more SEOG would do for someone, but okay, we're going to abide by that, right? You must ensure that SEOG funds are available to award throughout the year. So you can't just use it all up. Now, Sean, how many of us probably hold some SEOG funds back? You know, we're supposed to be holding some back and waiting for those students to come in spring. So technically, you have to do that. You have to come up with something in your policies and procedures to show that you are doing that. But, you know, the onus is on us to award it all and get as many students as we can in here. I get that. You know, you just need to, I'm just making you aware. You need to know that technically you have to have some that are being held back. Okay? SEOG matching requirements. 75% federal, 25% non-federal, and you may use state, institutional, or other monies to match it. Any funds except federal. You cannot match it with federal funds you're getting from the feds. There are different ways to do this match. You can do the student by student match. The school provides a share to individual recipient together with a federal share. Each student's total award consists of 25% non-federal and 75% federal. That's at the student level. The aggregate level means the school ensures that the sum of all the funds awarded to recipients comprises a 75% match and 25% match. I am believing that the aggregate is probably what most schools do. Do you guys think so? Probably just using it as the whole to determine? I think so, but know that there are different ways. Fund specific, the school establishes an SEOG fund to which it deposits its SEOG federal funds and requires 25% non-federal share. The awards to recipients are then made from the fund. That's also, it could be, that's the way also that a lot of schools are doing. So they're going to do it in such a way to where it's certainly easy to track. You guys, from a business office standpoint, you're gonna make sure that there's a way that you can document your share if you need to document that. If you guys have one, you guys may not have a 25% share either. So I'll mention to you that again, the application for a waiver of non-match is through a Title IV application, and that is sent to you or to the director, whoever's your primary destination point administrator, to say this application is available and out there ready for you to do. We found out at the Federal Student Aid Conference last year training that they were changing that to be a yearly application. So any of you who know you don't have a match, understand that they're making that a yearly application, and it used to be, I think, a 5-year approval. So that was news to me, and I thought I was behind on something, and then found out that I needed to start doing that every year. So just FYI. Everybody good? I'm trying. This is boring me to death. Good grief. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I love SEOG and work study. What are you talking about? Federal work study. I just had a salad. It's not like I had, you know, a cheeseburger or
Do
anything.
you have a problem getting students to want to do the work study? Because from conversations with, like Michelle, our students are working in the fall, but they don't want to work in the spring. They'd rather be at the beach. I mean, you know, they're not as interested in working in the spring as they are in the fall.
I can only speak for us. We have students who are constantly wanting more work study funds.
Are you?
We do, so, you know, whether or not it's more in the fall, more in the spring, I can't say, because what happens with us is that a lot of our athletes want to work, so it depends on their season, so we kind of, you know, alternate that for us. Anybody else have an opinion? Been there long enough to recognize? So what you're saying is you cut your students off?
No, I mean, we had that many that
Don't want to work.
So you didn't have enough funds for everybody who wanted to work. Gotcha. Yeah, it's the opposite of what, yeah. Because it could also happen that you end up with students who have worked so much that you start seeing your allocation, and that's something you need to make sure you are watching, is that if you only have a certain amount of funds to spend, and if you have a year where students have just worked and had way more students to work, sometimes I call it a crapshoot. It's hard to predict, because you're predicting human behavior on whether they're going to work the funds, right? Which is why they give you some of that leeway on carrying funds backward and forward when it comes to work study. You know, we found that we're starting to get into April, and like, oh my goodness, we're getting close to our limit. We're gonna have to stop everybody from working so that we don't go over our limit if we don't have, you know, the ability to bring funds forward and backward and that kind of thing. So, you know, you just have to monitor that and be very cautious of that. As well as you have to monitor at the student level to make sure that a student, if they're awarded $2,000 for the academic year, that they've not gone over the $2,000 limit, because then you're in a compliance issue per student to make sure they're not over-awarded in need-based federal funds, right?
I would get and say that. I think sometimes they don't realize, well, we still have a waiting list, but some of them don't realize that it factors into their budget. So they still feel like they should get other funds that they really it's just free money that's just fun.
That's a good point. That's a good point, Sam.
We have a waiting list of like 100 kids that still want work study that we can't fund.
Yeah.
And so one thing that I've done is when I'm evaluating packaging for next year, the kids that have work study that don't want to work, I take a portion of the award they had the previous year away and give it to someone else. We don't, when I started doing that, we don't have the issue as much with them not working, because they realize if they don't earn it,
Right.
if they don't put forth the effort to earn it, then they're not going to get it the next year.
That's right. And two things along with that is that, you know, you can renew it knowing someone is working if they're filing and they're eligible and they filed on time and all of that. But to your point is very well taken as well, as you put work study on their package, somehow they seem to think that there's $2,000 extra, if that's what you award them, to pay on their bill. And they don't seem to understand, no, you get to work that, and that's a paycheck coming back to you. Depends on the school. Some schools allow students to sign that back over to help pay their bill, but for some reason they think it's free money and they're not having to work because they don't understand the concept. And I know we all give them information to read, we tell them, and it's just very hard for them to understand, because we're also most of the time talking about a very needy population that's a lot of time first-generation college students and so on and so forth. So it's an education process here on how we're trying to let them know. Just because you see an amount of money, it's self-help. You know, the term self-help is the loans and the work study. And half of the time, they don't completely understand they're even getting a loan. Yes, a loan is something you pay back. You know, that seems so duh, but to new students, we do this every day, and that's back to, you know, it's, I take it my responsibility, our responsibility to educate them to understand what it is. They do it, you know, and the parents, they do it once a year. Some of them, this is the first time they've ever done it, right? So we have to make sure we give them enough information. Now, yes, it does frustrate the snot out of me when they don't read something I've given them, and or you've told them and you put a note in and you know you've told them. You know, I don't want to cast aspersions about these wonderful little babies that are students that are coming in, but there is some of that as well, that there's an expectation of a $2,000 extra going on my account, and it's just an education process. Again, I'm high in the sky and saying, oh, we need to tell them. I get it too, because my kids walk in, you know, my students come in, oh no, my mama did it. You know, that's mostly what they know. They're just there. You know, again, I said, I got kids that do the same thing. You know, and again, if we keep ourselves in that mindset that that's how they're going to act, we manage our expectations, then we're less shocked and frustrated when they don't meet the expectation we want them to have, if that makes any sense. Again, don't think we should drop our expectations. I'm just telling us to manage our expectations so that we can go one more time today. Let me tell you, it's work study, it's a job, and you're going to get paid. It's not coming off your bill. So, but we all deal with some of those same kinds of things, you know. So, other questions? Okay. Eligible students, undergrad and grad professional students can be eligible for federal work study, which is different than your SEOG, your Pell, and all of that. Eligible employment, institution on or off campus, federal, state, or local public agency, private nonprofit, or private for-profit organization. We don't have any of our students that are going into the for-profit because that gets a little sticky if you ask me as well. So we have enough students that want to work on campus, and then we have to have a certain portion of our students who are working in a community service role. How many here are familiar that there's a requirement that 7% of your funds be earned by students in community service? So many of you. Those of you who didn't know, guess what? 7% of your work study funds have to be earned in community service, and it's got to be eligible community service. There has to be a contract involved with the program that they're working with. Our example is our Boys and Girls Club. We have something called the Wesley Shelter, domestic abuse shelter. We have also, in our situation, Chet about this, and I learned this at a new aid officers that I was training, someone else said, our library, because it's open free to the public, is considered community service. Some schools are that way. You're in a small town like us, libraries use it and considered community service. So 7% of our funding has to be paid to our students out of community service work. So it just depends, you know, on what you've got going on. Be very careful. There is a requirement by the federal government that within that community, I'm trying to find my glasses in my hand, y'all. Let me put them back on. Let me go to it so I can say it exactly correctly. Schools must use 7% of their federal work study program funds to compensate students employed in community service jobs, okay? With at least one employed as a reading tutor for children in a reading tutoring project or performing family literacy activities in a family literacy project. So one of your, at least one student has to be in that capacity. Now we cover that because we have AVID programs. Anybody familiar with that? In the K through 12 system, we have tutors that go to our K through 12 schools working with AVID students who are tutoring reading. Make sense? Just know there are stipulations. You just can't just have everybody work study. And in some cases, depending on where you are, you may have students that they don't have transportation to go off campus to work in some of those community service roles. So just again, keep that in mind. That's a federal regulation. And don't you love it when somebody up there just makes a whole bunch of decisions for you to have to keep up with community service projects in your town to get students to work there, right? I know. But it works. It's actually worked out. And our students have actually been very, very excited to work with our community service programs in Wilson County. And there are several. The other thing that you have to do or you should focus on doing is having students who are working in positions that enhance what they're going to school for. Not totally required, but yet that's what you're supposed to focus. We've got a lot of social work majors. Guess what? Fits perfectly in some of those programs and what they're doing, especially the domestic violence shelter and some of those kinds of things. So again, it's a good program. You can, see that's positive, but some schools don't realize that they're required to keep up with that and make sure that those funds are coming from that. So from our perspective, our payroll has different accounts to where they track what's coming, what's being paid to a student from our community service projects. And we have a work study coordinator who's working closely with our not-for-profit organizations in Wilson to make sure we have the contract and that the supervisor's aware of what's going on. And we have to keep a handle on that. But a lot of our students are tutoring inside the public school system, which is very positive. Got ahead of myself on the slide, but you see we can do, again, we're back to the 25% match. If you're in community service, you can pay that 100%. So you don't have to match the 25% if they're in the community service. Again, look at those regulations if you are in charge of that, because that may be something you need to work very closely with your business office folks or your controller folks to make sure that's happening the way it needs to happen. Mention the 7% allocation to community service and emergency preparedness included in the definition of